Okay, she wants to know about our bond rating and our current debt service. We have been borrowing more than we should have in the recent past, but I think compared to most states, except for our pension debt, I don't think that we're way out of line. I think that actually Illinois has been reasonably okay on the bond and debt. This is a complicated question. It's a little like the mortgage on your house. You know, to what extent should you be mortgaging how much of your future? And it seems to me the most important thing is that when you go into debt, either as a family or as a state, you do so because you're borrowing against long-term improvements. You're not borrowing for operations. And I think, unfortunately, over these last few years, there's been a tendency, again, particularly on the part of the dearly departed, to decide that mortgaging for groceries is a good plan. I think that is never a good idea, and I'm certainly hopeful that the new governor will agree. But the pension issue is a serious one, and Illinois, among the states, is about lowest when it comes to meeting its pension obligations. In 1995, we did adopt legislation that set a schedule for catching up. And unfortunately, it was, people don't like to raise your taxes. So what happened was, the idea was that in the early years of the ramp up, we didn't have to put a whole lot of money into the pension system, so we could use that money for other stuff. And then, over some period of time, more and more money had to go into the pension system. And the biggest chunk of change is going to be in this coming fiscal year and the fiscal year following. So the obligation that I talked about, nearly $2 billion in new money for the pensions, comes about from the 1995 law. Should we make it through next fiscal year and the one following, we can begin looking at level payments to the pension system, which would be great, but we are not there yet. Yes?
I don't know if it's turned on.
What is our bond rating?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But I don't think it's terrible, except that everybody's in trouble because everybody's in trouble, so.
I'll just ask the question. Do you need to, you said that there's going to be a $2 to $4 billion deficit this year.
2.8 is the last number I've seen, which is 10%.
Does that need to be fixed before you start the next year?
Yes,
or?
either through cuts or through finding new revenues. And we're already halfway through the fiscal year, more than halfway through the fiscal year. So the idea of making significant cuts is particularly unappealing. Yeah, so we're going to have to figure out a way. Now, some of the federal recovery money may help. I don't think it's going to be enough to do the job. But I think that could be a help. And the idea is to get this signed by the president before President's Day. So if that happens, then I think we can expect an infusion of resources into Illinois, but it will not be as much as Illinois needs right now. And what we've been doing has been delaying our responsibility, so we're not paying on time.
Okay, and Dan Hines in his annual financial report said that you're $42 billion behind on your pension debt.
Right. That's
You're
what we just
$24 billion behind on your other post-retirement debt. Are you going to start also pre-funding your post-employment debt, your health care, the $24 billion that hasn't been even
That's
on
certainly
the
going to
books
be
yet?
on the table, and I think we now have a more responsible person at the helm, and I'm hopeful we can confront that.
Well, thank you for your leadership on the last action for the dearly departed.
You've spoken about additional revenue sources. How about reduction in expenses?
Absolutely, and that will certainly be on the table. One of the problems is if you're looking at an economy in trouble, that's a time when it's tough to cut expenses. Most of what we spend in Illinois state government is on human services and corrections. Now, I have all kinds of ideas how we could reduce the spending in the corrections budget, but that's not the bulk of the spending. The bulk of the spending is in Medicaid, which is payments to providers of medical services to the poor, whether those are welfare moms and their kids or formerly middle-class people who are in nursing homes. So the bulk of our money goes there, and then of course education is another major recipient of state largesse. So, you know, if you canceled the Environmental Protection Agency, cancel, let's forget about the environment, that would be, you know, this much of a budget that's big. So that is that big. So there's no simple, easy way to say we'll take a major axe and figure out how to do a better job of funding state government. And all I'm saying is that it is particularly tough to think about cutting human services at a time when people are in unemployment lines and are showing a greater need for those services. But yet we all do try hard to find ways to cut inefficiencies in government. We do not do as good a job as we should. One of the things we should do better, in my view, is to make sure when we begin programs, we figure out how to evaluate their effectiveness at the end of the day. And it is my impression, from having hung around all this time, that in fact what happens is somebody has a great idea for preventing teen pregnancy. So we jump into a pilot program that's going to do the job. And 3 years down the road, there's some other approach to the same problem, and we jump into that one too. And pretty soon we have 16 different programs scattered throughout 4 different agencies, and we never took the time to figure out which of them, if any, worked, which worked well, which with a little fine-tuning could do a better job. So I think one of the problems that we face in government is that most of us have a time frame that is not long-term, it's until the next election. So governors are there for 4 years, legislators for, most of us for 2. And so there's not as much incentive to do the kind of evaluation you would do in private. I mean, basically, I think government does a very good job in providing services, and I don't think that we stack badly against Sears Roebuck or Commonwealth Edison. But I do think that we do not do the long-range planning and the evaluation that we ought to be doing, and I think the biggest explanation is the short time frame of elected officials. Sharon.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your past, present, and future leadership. You've been a dynamite in terms of that. My question has to do with pensions. Federal stimulus is not going to help funding the pensions.
No, it is not.
And therefore, what are the possibilities now being considered regarding funding the pensions?
What we've done, I told you there was a legislation passed more than 10 years ago
I know
that set up a scheme. And we have generally regarded the pension funding issue as one that you pay for out of state general revenues. So the ramp up, how much more we have to put in this year as against last, that comes out of general funds. And the problem we're looking at right now is that there aren't the general funds that could do the job. And I think we do need to be serious about this, no question about it. But let me just give you a little tiny bit of history. And that is that part of the reason Illinois is so far down the tree when it comes to pension funding compared to other states is that we didn't pay much attention to it for many, many years. The 24 or 22 years that Jim Thompson was governor, I mean, I don't mean to pick on him, but during the time he was governor, we never put a penny into the unfunded liability of the pension system. We paid obligations, we paid for the current retirees, we paid them every penny they were owed, but there was no effort to try to find a long-term solution to the unfunded liabilities that we knew were out there looming. So we started out with a kind of devil-may-care attitude that lasted for a generation without anybody saying boo. And then all of a sudden, when Jim Enter is governor, then it becomes this, huge hue and cry, we've got to do something, and we should do something. And I'm not against that at all, but I just want us to understand that there is a context, and there is no question that Illinois will meet its obligation to all its retirees, those who are already on the retiree rolls, and those who have worked for state government under contracts that basically tell you what your pension is worth. And I have no doubt we will continue to do that, but I'm hopeful that we can figure a way so that we can get on that level playing field, even playing field, so that we don't find ourselves having to find an extra $2 billion this year